Great. Thank you. Peter, I have no sound. There you go. No, just a little bit. Yeah, it needs to be, we're getting there. Is it loud enough? A little bit more? That's good? Ah, there we go. Great. We have sound. That's good. So we are live streaming this. So welcome to those who are, there's some cameras up above. Welcome to those who are watching online. It also means that you can watch this if you're in a place that has good Wi-Fi connection. You can live stream it at home, and you can let others know that they can watch it later. So welcome everyone here tonight. And a huge welcome to elders and members of Fisher River Cree Nation, especially those who have come down today. Oh no, yes, down. It's a long drive. Thank you for making that drive. We're so honored that you're here tonight. Some of you may have already seen the display downstairs. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, you might want to go. Tomorrow there'll be some time if you are here tomorrow. It's a Brandon Residential School display that we have brought up, and it's being open to the public and to school groups that have come in throughout this past week. And I just heard that we've had about 600 people come through this week to see it. That includes 18 classes of École River Heights School. 17 classes came from there, and one class came from our neighboring Carpathia Elementary School. So we're thrilled about that. And a lot of people came from the public to see as well. So that's great news to hear. So I'm going to now introduce Gloria. She is our speaker tonight. So when I first heard Gloria speaking at our Prairie du Pine regional meeting 2 years ago, 3? 2 years. COVID has screwed up my sense of memory, but I was stunned at what she said. Oh, yeah, I always forget to introduce myself. Right, Gloria reminded me. So I'm Lorraine Mackenzie Shepherd. I'm the minister here at Westworth United Church. So our regional meeting was all online, 2 days, 2 solid days of Zoom, which I was not looking forward to at all until Gloria changed that for me when she spoke. Her stories were riveting. Many I had heard before, but she has this an analytical way of presenting this overview of colonial history that brought it all together for me in a way I hadn't heard before. That brought a lot of ahas for me. And there were 3 others from our congregation who were also watching, and they all shared the same experience with you. So they're thrilled that you're here with us tonight. Gloria is a sought-after speaker. She is speaking in this province and elsewhere. She was born and raised in Fisher River, Cree Nation. She went to high school in Transcona Collegiate here in Winnipeg, and then worked for over 25 years here in Winnipeg with health and Indigenous affairs. She moved back home to Fisher River to work then with health and with administration, with the band council, and then also worked with the National United Church to assist Indigenous United Churches across the country. So join me in giving a warm welcome to Gloria.
Thank you. Welcome, Tansy. Tansy is a Cree word for hello, how are you? And so I welcome everyone here tonight. I also would like to thank the Creator for this wonderful day, for this beautiful day, this fall day, and fall season is upon us. As we drove from Fisher over here, we could see the leaves changing, and it was beautiful. So before I start, I'd like to honor our elders that are present, and our Indigenous elders, and also the residential school survivors. This particular event is about related to the Assiniboia Residential School, but it also is about residential schools in general. And so my spirit name is Bird Calling Woman, and I belong to the Bear Clan. And my mom and dad were both in residential school, but I was not. Our family, my younger sister and I were the only ones in our family of 10 children that did not go to residential school. But we lived residential school because our parents only knew what they knew and learned. And so when they came home and got married, they brought us up in a rigid way. My mom went to Brandon Residential School, and my dad went to Elkhorn Residential School, or industrial school they called it. My dad was a very strong influence on my life. He believed in sending us away from the community to go to school and to do something with our life. And he had a strong work ethic that he learned in the industrial school where he went, and so he made us work hard. And he didn't show his emotions, and so he would make sure that we didn't show our emotions either. And so I have a strong, difficult time sometimes to show my emotions. My mom, on the other hand, was the opposite. She could show her emotions, and we often had to take care of her when she was feeling sad, when she was feeling mad, or just feeling down. And so sometimes I think we felt like we were the caretakers and caregivers. But she could feel anger and sadness and happy feelings. She could also dance and be happy. And so most of our life, we centered our feelings around how she was feeling. And so that was a challenge again for us to show our emotions unless she was okay with it. My mom's mom was a medicine woman. She picked plants and roots, and she was also a midwife. And she was Ojibwe from Saging First Nation. And my dad's parents were from Norway House. My dad's dad was from Norway House, and my dad's mother was from Fisher River. So a little bit of history on who I am and my journey. But as I go through the presentation, I'll share a little bit more too about our journey as a Cree person. So I'd like to ask respectfully if you're okay with it, residential school survivors, if you wouldn't mind standing, or if you're intergenerational like myself, to stand and just wave at each other, wave at the crowd. So I ask you to do that now. Stand for a minute. Thank you, thank you. I honor you. I honor you and acknowledge you. So my presentation tonight is our journey as a Cree people. The presentation I have is a generic presentation, and so it may very well apply to all Indigenous peoples across the country, but I can only speak from my perspective and from my Cree Indigenous background. And so we will get started. So we'll go with the first slide. Peter. So this is a model that I put together in form of a presentation, in form of a medicine wheel. A medicine wheel is a tool that is used in teaching, and so it can be used in various ways. So I did with the four, it's usually in four sections or four quadrants. And so I'm going to talk about who we were as a Cree people or as an Indigenous people. The second quadrant, I'm going to talk about what was, what happened, and then what is, and then who we are. So that will be my presentation tonight. So next one, please. So who we were as Indigenous peoples was we were a self-governing, self-sustaining people. And so our people were natural environmentalists, and we moved around a lot. And even before, our people from Fisher River came from Norrie House, but even prior to that, our people moved with the land. And so our people would stay in one area and take from the land what they needed to sustain themselves, and then they would move to another area. And that was a way of giving the earth, Mother Earth, to rejuvenate herself and sustain herself. And so we were a natural environmentalist. We lived off the land. So the next slide, please. So as a people, we had our own governing system. We had natural laws that we lived by, and some people refer to them now as the 7 teachings, spiritual teachings, but those were our natural laws that our people lived by. And so the roles were very clear to our families. Children, for example, were allowed to play and play on Mother Earth and go and explore. And the grannies and grandpas or the elders would often accompany them. And so the elders were our teachers, and they would accompany and walk with the children as they learned and played. And the children were close to spirit, close to Creator. And even now today, if you notice and if you take note of a child, they're often wise. They'll say wise things that come out of their mouth, and you wonder, where did that come from? Well, that's because as an Indigenous people, we believe that our children were very sacred and had a lot of wisdom and a lot of to share. The youth were helped by the elders again and by the adults to transition from youth to adulthood, because the youth were our future leaders, and so they were taught how to be leaders. And so they were part of a council that formed and worked with the leadership in our communities. The women were our caregivers, and they looked after family and they looked after community. And so we would have women councils that also would advise the leadership, the chief and council. And those were intrinsic and very inborn and close to our spirit and way of life. The men were our providers and protectors. And so today, even though we've been on a difficult journey, we still see those gifts within our people. And the youth represent courage. And so oftentimes you'll see youth very outspoken and not afraid of anything. They take risks, and the women will stand up at council meetings. And I remember we had an elder in our community who would often do that, and she led our community leadership and she would tell them what to do and how to take care of community, including the land. We called her Old Vaya, and she was but her name was Olivia. But because of our language, we spoke a different way in our English language, and we lived close to the land. Our language was also associated with our land. Our language, Cree language, is very descriptive. So there's not only just one word for a certain word in English. We describe, and so language is very important to us. And spirituality was a way of life for us. We lived a holistic life. We had our mental, which was our mind, but we also sometimes refer to in the Christian world as our ego. And so, But our elders would often teach us that you don't just use your mind, you have to connect it to your heart. And when we speak from our heart, then it's close to spirit. That's how spiritual our people were. And we have also emotional and physical. And so those two were very connected. And so oftentimes you will hear people say, my gut feeling is this. Or some people, other groups will say, our intuition. Well, our elders would say, that's our feeling. We could feel it here either in our stomach first, in our gut, or in our heart. And so we didn't separate those areas of our being. And spirit was very strong, and it was the common thread that worked through our mental, emotional, and physical. So we lived in balance, and I remember my dad had some teachings, and he would say it in a different way, but for example, he would say, don't be too proud, because if you're too proud and you get above yourself, then Creator will bring you down and teach you a lesson in humility. And so he knew those traditional laws, but he didn't exactly say this is a natural law. And but now, as I get older, I understand and realize what he talked about. Some of those rules, he called it. So when we get out of balance in these four quadrants of mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical, then oftentimes something will trip us, and that, Creator will trip us, and we'll get just a reminder to get back into balance again. So the next slide, please. So what was what happened to our people. Our people from Fisher River moved from Norway House, and we're the only Cree community in the south. So our journey took us from Norway House along Lake Winnipeg to, we were supposed to be settling in the Hecla area. We didn't quite make it there, but we did live along the lake for a while. But eventually, the government moved us to Fisher River, so we went back a little bit north from there. So what happened was, to us as a people, is an introduction of a foreign system. It wasn't right or wrong, it was just a different system than ours. Our way of governing was considered the matriarchal system, and so it was circular, and where everyone was equal, and it was based on shared power, and everyone had a voice, and it was based on caregiving. And so the matriarchal system is kind of based on the women's role too, because women were caregivers. And so even our councils, even though we had a chief and council, the chief would listen to the people in the circle, and there would be youth councils, there'd be women councils, and the men also had, and elders. So we had all those councils that advised our leadership. And the chief would speak for the people. So the chief was often the person that would listen, and he was our voice. So the other system is considered a patriarchal system, and it's like a triangle. And it's also a different, it's hierarchical, meaning that as you move up, you have more power. And it was just a different way of making decisions. And so there was less power for the people at the bottom of the triangle, and as you moved up, and it was often one person that had the power at the top. And so this patriarchal system was kind of like a corporate system today. If you think of corporations, they're mostly patriarchal and business. So it was a different way of governing. And when we had first contact, the first type of agreement we had was the treaties. And so there's, I believe, 11 treaties across the country, and we are part of Treaty 5. So Treaty 5 includes some bands and First Nations on the east side of Lake Winnipeg, Fisher River, and then the northern Manitoba. So mostly Cree, but there are some Ojibwe communities that are part of Treaty 5. And the treaties was not giving up our land, but rather it was about sharing the land and sharing the resources. And I remember some of our council members and elders would say that when they signed the treaty, they agreed that we would have to, the non-Indigenous communities, the settlers, could only use the height of a shovel. And they had to work with us, but it didn't turn out that way. And so the treaties became, I guess, a challenge for many of our people across the country. And our treaties were also verbal because our elders spoke verbal, and they had their interpreters, but the non-Indigenous people and governments had their own way, and they said they had it in writing. And so the written treaties that you might read are not always what we have our understanding as treaties. And so we often, as Indigenous people, will have treaty meetings, and we talk about, the elders will talk about what that verbal agreement was, and they carry that on verbally into generations. So when the government came into being, they didn't take the time to understand who we were and to take the time to understand our way of living and our way of life, our governance. And so our people were very open and trusting and accepting, and because of those natural laws, the caregiving laws. And so we opened our arms to the settlers and welcomed them. And oftentimes you'll see that we don't often take an aggressive role. And so when the system came into being, the message that we received as a people was that we are right and we know what's best for you, and so we'll decide for you, and that who we were was wrong. And so from there, the government systems then started to establish itself, and the Indian Act was established. And the Indian Act is a document put in place by the legislation and government. It defines who we were. It defined who we were as Indian people, thus the Indian Act. And the strongest and biggest influence in the Indian, under the Indian Act was the Indian agent. Indian agents were placed on nearby reserves, and they called them Indian agencies. And so the Indian agent would define the rules and often make policies on his own. It was always a male, and so it was a patriarchal system. And so most powerful, influential person. And in our community, I remember stories that my dad and other elders shared about the Indian agent and how powerful he was. He often worked with the RCMP and with the church, with the minister. In Fisher River, the first church was a Methodist church before the United. And so it was very rigid and with the same message that who we were was wrong. And so he often worked with the Indian agent too. And so the Indian agent put rules in place. And one of the rules was that we couldn't leave the reserve. They put us on reserves, Indian reserves, the colonies. So that's the word colonization. So we were put on reserves close to the water and the bush because we lived off the land. And so they used that to their benefit, but it didn't benefit us because we couldn't move anywhere, and so we had to live in those small colonized communities, and we still do. We still live on reserves. the reserve, we had boundaries. We couldn't leave if we left for more than 3 months. Like sometimes the men would leave to go and work. If they left for more than 3 months, then they would lose their status. And part of the treaty was, and status was, they would line us up in our communities, and each of us would get a number. And so, and we also received English names. So some of us have still those names that were named after ministers or Indian agents, like Murdoch was a common name, and I can't think of the others, but there was, there were some of the names that were given to our people by the Indian agent. And so if one of our parents left, if our dads left to go to work, then he couldn't come back and live on the reserve. He couldn't come back and live with the family, so he had to live somewhere else and off the reserve in the city or whatever. And so if someone wanted to join the army, they would have to lose their treaty number or their status, and they had no rights, so they couldn't come back and live on the reserve. So there was different ways that the Indian agent would make those rules, and the agency. So there was many ways, I guess, that we were governed by the Indian Act. The residential school system was also based on the military. The first prime minister went to the States to look at how the U.S. ran their residential schools, and he came back, and MacDonald came back, and he also recruited the military and the churches to help run the residential schools. And so when our older siblings talked about their experience in residential school, they often talked about how it was very rigid, and so this, with the same message, who we were was wrong. So let's go to, well, before we do go into the next slide, I wanted to share a writing piece that I did to honor residential school survivors, and I did this in 2013. I love writing, and so I often write little stories or poems, and so this one I wrote to honor our residential school survivors, and it's entitled, "How Did I Get Here?" I didn't ask to leave my family when I was so little, to go to that school so far away, to live with strangers. I am only 5 years old. How did I get here? I was so scared. They cut my shiny ebony hair. Grandma was so proud of my braids. She loved combing my hair as she hummed a song to me. I didn't ask to come here. I don't mean to cry, but it is so lonely at night. It feels so strange here. These sheets are cold and no one is here to comfort me, no one to kiss me goodnight. I didn't ask to come here. I don't understand what you are trying to teach me. Even though I am forced to speak a different language, I still think in Cree because it is my mother's tongue. I am afraid to ask for help because you tell me I am stupid. I didn't ask to come here. Why can't I sit with my big brother in church, and why am I called a sinner and no good? I thought our Creator was the same as your God. I want to go home and pray with my elders. I am only 8. I didn't ask to come here. I am so angry. One of the other kids told me that my mom died. She heard the adults talking. I want to go home to say goodbye, but they won't let me. I am too young, they said. I'm only 10. I think I'm going to run away. Who cares if I get punished, but which way is home? I didn't ask to come here. Home, home at last. Why did you wait so long to send for me? Why are you looking at me so strangely? It's me, remember? I am your family. Mom, Dad, why do you seem so distant? I am not different. I still feel the same inside. I am home. Please, someone give me a hug. It's been 10 years since I left. I didn't ask to go there. Who are all these strange people in our house? What is in that bottle that is making you act so strangely? It's not funny. Don't fight, please don't fight. I can't sleep. I feel so cold. Granny is gone. No one is here to hug me or to sing to me. I am confused and I feel so lost. I want to go back. I don't want to be here. Why do I have to become someone else to work here? What do you mean who I am is not important? But I am a person and my name is. Look at you? My elders tell me it is rude and disrespectful to stare at someone so boldly. I can do the job. Never mind. I think I will go back home. I am not welcome here. If I go back home, at least I could pretend to fit in, but how will I get home when I only have $5 in my pocket? I can't ask anyone for money. Come and join you, you say? I've never slept in a cardboard box before, but I suppose it would be like sleeping in the open air. But I can't even see the stars. It feels like the cold sheets that I used to sleep in at that school. I didn't ask to be here. How did I get here? So these are blips of stories that I heard from our residential school survivors. And it tells the full circle and journey that some of our people went through. Some of our people were as young as 4 years old that went to a residential school and never returned home. And so when they reached adulthood, they had to leave. And so they didn't fit anywhere in the world or nor in our communities. And so oftentimes I see people on the street and I wonder what their story is or where they came from. But some other stories that were shared, our parents were told that, because who we were as a people, we were taught how to be a family and how to be leaders, how to be community, and how to be part of a group. But when our residential school survivors returned home, they didn't have the opportunity to learn that bonding and family connection. And so they would get married and have children, and all they knew was what they learned in residential school. And so that's how we were brought up. And oftentimes it led to addictions and anger that, when they returned home. And so other systems then came into the community, like Children's Aid. And so our parents were told, you don't know how to be a parent, you don't know how to bring up your children, so we'll take your children and take care of them for you. And today we have Child and Family Services, which is a replica of Children's Aid. And today I'm told that we have over 10,000 children in care in Manitoba alone. And so that was a big system that took our children, including the 60 scoop. Children were taken and adopted out. So what was the start of a governing system that thought, we know what's best for you and we'll decide for you. And the Indian agent was one of the biggest influential people in our community, along with the church and the RCMP. So when, at that point in time, I think it was around the 1960s, Indian Affairs, Indigenous Affairs is known as today, came to a place and didn't know what to do with the Indian problem, they called it. And so they said, let's give it back to the people and let them take care of themselves. And our leaders were caring and we're in the same boat where they had good intentions. We know what we need, and we know what to do to take care of ourselves. So we'll take it. They called it self-transfer, or devolution, I think was the first word that they used. And so transfer of control then took place. But from my perspective, there was no transition of our leadership to take over that problem that already was in existence. And so it was just dumped on our communities, I believe. And so we inherited the problem after the governments didn't know what to do with residential school survivors that didn't make it, and other addictions that we faced in our life. So let's go to the next slide. So like I said, the mindset of these systems was, we know what's best for you, we will decide for you. And our people accepted this new way and welcomed the people into our lives. And Indigenous intrinsic values, those intrinsic values I talked about, those 7 natural laws, those were inbred, those were part of who we were, and spirit given to us by God or by Creator. And so we didn't lose who we were. And even though we were part of those systems and still are part of the system today, our reserve system is based on that system as well. And so Indian Affairs has passed on that same Indian agent kind of process. And so our people are struggling with it, our leaders now, and we're trying to find ourselves and trying to define who we were. But deep down, intrinsically, we never lost those natural laws. We still have respect, we still have pride, we still have courage, we still have that wise spirit within us. And even in the church, the church tells us often that we are made in God's image. And so for me, I believe that's who we are, that's that wise spirit within us. And even the smallest child has that wise spirit, and they know what's right and what is needed. And so those intrinsic values and way of life still exist within us, and the new system didn't define who we were. So our people were almost destroyed. We weren't totally destroyed because we had that strong spirit within us, and wherever we lived, we still have that spirit within us. And so it's our fundamental way of living. And spiritual life in our Indigenous community is the foundation of our lifestyle and who we are. So the next slide, please. So what is the result of all those systems and their impact on us? And as children, and as people, if you're told long enough that who we were was wrong, then we're going to start believing it. And so, but that wisdom inside of our young people and our adults and leaders are coming up, and so they're standing up. And so oftentimes you'll see rallies and fighting for our rights. But what has happened also during that time of the Indian agent is it created dependency, because we had no decision making, we had no choice, and the Indian agent made decisions for us with that mindset that I know what's best for you, I'll decide. And so our people accepted that, but in the process, it created dependency. And even our elders, our fishermen, often, as families, we would go out on the lake together during fishing season, and that was part of a great teaching for family. We gathered out on the fishing camps for the whole summer, and into the fall, into September. And at one point, then the Indian agent put a stop to that and said, you can't do that. You have to, your children have to go to school, and residential school, and so the moms and children had to stay home, and the fishermen would go out on the lake on their own. And I remember my dad saying that broke up our family. And then the welfare system came into place saying, if you keep your families home, then we'll look after the children and the mothers. And so that welfare system, again, my dad often said, the welfare system was the worst thing that happened to our people because it created dependency. And with the reserves that we live in now, most of the land there is nothing can be done there. It's swamp and it's bush where we can hunt, and but we can't move, and so we can't sustain the land. And in our Cree language, we call reserves, Indian reserves, skunigan, and that means ugly land. And so even our leaders, you'll hear chiefs talking at conferences, and they often refer to our communities as skunigan. And so our people knew what was going on, but that dependency was really deeply embedded in us. And it created a lot of anger and grief and loss. And so today we see a lot of that in our communities. Sometimes our communities look well and look pretty good, but deep down, and when you really get into living into the community, we see a different side of our life where there's violence against self. We have a lot of youth and young people who are suicidal and suiciding, and it could be planned, or it doesn't necessarily have to be as well. They could do it through drugs and addictions. And so we have those struggles with us. We have grief and loss, a lot of grief and loss, a lot of deaths in our communities. And so, and shame, we still live with shame. I remember in our community, our people would go away for school and come back with an education. And if there is you see that process, it's not blatant, but if there was a non-Indigenous person and an Indigenous person with the same education background, guess who our people would pick? The non-Indigenous person. Because that's how deeply embedded that message is in us, that who we are is wrong. And so there's a lot of interlateral violence amongst our people, where we don't believe in ourselves as a people and as a group. And it's a real challenge for our workers, our resource people, to instill that pride into the people again, into the kids. And now we are faced with apathy. And apathy is where people don't care anymore. I give up kind of attitude and don't want to do anything. And so it's difficult oftentimes for our groups, our programs, to recruit people. And people will work for a little while and then they just say, what's the use? What am I doing here? What am I going to do? And so that apathy is often found in our workplaces and lateral violence. And so there's a struggle, and mistrust, a struggle for us to move forward. But there's hope. There's always hope. And so our people have been on healing journeys, and so people have gone to the churches for religion and spiritual healing, but also our young people are starting to go back to the traditional ways and finding themselves, our identity as a Cree people. And so we have a mix in our community. And at one time, our people would fight like this because when the traditional systems came into our community where our people wanted to define themselves, and young people were looking for who am I and where am I going? And so they would search out our old ways of who we were. What's that all about? But our churches are so strong that they would say, that's not us, that's not our way. And so there was a struggle for quite some time, but it's slowly getting back to a place where our people are realizing that we're Cree people. Who were we before? And so we need to regain that and be happy with who we are as Indigenous and as Cree people. And so I have to stand up and say that I'm proud to be a Cree woman. And thank you to my dad and my mom. My mom was very loyal to the church. She played the organ in our United Church for over 40 years. And she was, her mom was a traditional medicine woman, but she never shared anything with us. We would get sick, but my mom knew medicines, and so she would go in the bush and go and find medicine for us and make us, and give us a remedy, and we'd become well again. But she never shared those teachings with us. I often say that I think she must have struggled between the traditional way and also the Christian way. But she was very, very close to the church. My dad would share and would go to church occasionally, but he often helped with the practical things like cutting wood, because we'd have work bees and they'd cut wood for the church. And so he would go to church, and my mom would say, "Come to church," and she'd say, "Well, I don't want to go to church. I don't have to go." And so they would kind of have a disagreement. And then I remember my dad saying one day, he says, "I don't have to go to the church to pray. I can go into the bush and pray." And he spent a lot of time cutting wood. He said, cutting wood, he'd be in the bush. And now when I think about it, I think he was traditional but never shared it. And that was his church, was being in the bush and being on the land. And so we have Christian and traditional, but we also have a third group now where our people are, and I would say that I'm one of them, where church is important, but also who I am as a Cree person, as a Cree woman. And so I have to understand those traditional ways and those teachings as well. And so there's still a third person. The church says we're wrong. No, that's not our way. And our traditional people say the church is wrong. That's not our way. But we still have to get to a place of reconciling that. And we have to reconcile who we are as Indigenous and as Cree people. And nobody can do it. The church can't do it for us, neither can the government. We have to do it ourselves. And as a First Nation, as a Cree Nation, we are starting to do that now. And one of the first areas that we're trying to address and reconcile is child welfare, the Child and Family Services. And so our elders are getting together with the resources, and we're defining who we are. What did we do before to take care of our children? And lucky for us, we have a lawyer who is from Fisher River, and he's working with us, and he's helping us develop our own traditional law of taking care of our children. And the federal government has agreed now and passed legislation saying that First Nations can have their own child welfare laws, because at one point in time, the federal government, we're considered federal jurisdiction. And so we're federal Indians or whatever, under the Indian Act. And so, but when it comes to treaties and land, then the federal government would arbitrarily transfer the jurisdiction to the provincial government, and one is natural resources. In 1930, they passed a law saying now the provincial government is in charge of all the natural resources. And as Indigenous people and leaders, we have to now work with the provincial government about the land. And oftentimes, provincial government, more than often, provincial government do not see us as citizens of Manitoba, that we're a federal responsibility, we're federal jurisdiction, and so they'd say, well, you have to go talk to the federal government. And the federal government then will tell, no, natural resources is not our jurisdiction anymore, you have to go work with the province. And the other jurisdiction that was really important to us was child welfare. Child welfare was transferred to the provincial government, and so the provincial government defined what was abuse and what would happen if a child was put in care. And so Children's Aid, even though the province would say they didn't have any jurisdiction, they had no problem coming on the reserve and taking our children. And so today, our governing systems on reserve are replicas of the patriarchal system, not the matriarchal system. And so when Child and Family Services, again, was transferred to the First Nations, we had to follow provincial guidelines and provincial laws, but yet when it is convenient, they say you're a federal jurisdiction. So it causes a lot of challenge for our leaders in our communities. But like I said, there's hope. We have a lot of professional people that are invisible to the world. The world doesn't see that part of our Indigenous community, and I think what's most visible oftentimes are the poor people and the people that are on the streets. We have lawyers, we have doctors, we have psychologists, we have professional people with masters and PhDs. We have a band member that is currently writing a story about Fisher River, our journey to Fisher River. And so she's doing a historical documented record of our journey as Cree people. And she's doing 2 books, one for the school to use as a curriculum, and another one with the elder stories about our history. And so she's a professor at the University of Saskatchewan, and she's a band member. And we have others in the city and in the world that are professionals and are living in suburbs and in the city, but they're invisible. And oftentimes, where the world view is that we get everything free and that we do not contribute anything to the world, but that's not true. While the reserve is tax exempt, if we work on the reserve, we don't pay income tax, but we pay provincial tax on purchases in local stores. And usually in our communities, we live close to towns. And at least in my perspective, our Indigenous communities in the area are big business, and they help sustain the businesses in the towns. And I saw it a couple of weeks ago. I went and there was something going on with Indigenous communities, and they were at some events. And when I went to shop at a local store, which is a few miles away, there was hardly anybody there. And I said, "Where's everybody?" And the lady says, "I don't know." She says, "What's going on in your community?" And so if you go to the stores, you'll often see a lot of Indigenous peoples purchasing. So money is viewed in a different way by our people, I believe. If we want something, we'll buy it. And so I think that the corporate world realizes that. And so we own nothing on the reserve. That's part of the Indian Act. So we don't own our homes. We don't own anything. It's all in the government's name and the band name. But as individuals, I could not use my home as collateral if I went for a bank loan, because it doesn't belong to me, even though I maintain it and upgrade it and renovate it and everything else. But I can't use that as collateral. The only collateral that I could use is movable assets, like my vehicle or anything that's movable, because if I forfeited on my loan, the bank could come and take my car. So those fixed assets like houses or those kind of things that are stuck to the ground, so to speak, that all belongs to the government. And so we own nothing. And our leaders are working on that to try and change it so that we have some collateral. And so the provincial government doesn't recognize us as citizens. They don't say that, but provincial government, 2 ministers came to meet with our chief and council recently, and I asked them to advocate for us as contributing citizens, I said, please advocate for us because that will help us become more visible and accepted as citizens of Manitoba as well. So I think they nodded their head, so hopefully they'll do that. So let's go to the next, see what is on the next. So who we are. So who we are is where we have to go as Indigenous people. So as our Cree Nation, Fisher River, we have to decide for ourselves what is best for us. But it's a long journey ahead because of our history and what we faced intergenerationally. My grandparents and my parents were residential school survivors, and you only know what you knew when you learn as children, and so you carry that forward. And so we have, as individuals, to make that decision for ourselves. We have, and again, another teaching of the medicine wheel is the 4 quadrants is self, family, community, and world. And so we have to start with self first, and we have to start healing. And we might have a lot of professional people, but even the professional people have to heal from that intergenerational impact on our lives as individuals and be happy with who we are. And I have experienced and seen the loss and grief that some of our professional people also still face, and the anger and violence in the workplace. It's still there, you know, with, and so that as an individual, we all have to do that to heal and start following those natural laws of respect and kindness and humility and courage. In our Cree teachings, in the other Ojibwe and other nations, they often separate truth and honesty. And our elders from up north, our Cree elders, told us that at one time truth and honesty were together, and that they somehow eliminated generosity and sharing. But as Cree people, generosity and sharing is a very close natural law for us. We're very generous, and so when something happens in our community, the community will come together. So when there's a death, the whole community comes together, regardless of whether we're religious or traditional or whatever, and so we'll often see that happening. And families also come together and support one another. So we have to go in that direction. Again, when we're working on the Child and Family Services law, we as elders got together on Zoom, would you believe, during the COVID, and that was a new learning experience for us as well. And we started sharing stories and defining for ourselves what did we learn from our parents and grandparents about some of those teachings. And it's so interesting, some of the stories that came out that our elders shared. And someday it would be nice to have those stories put in a book, I think. It'd be great. So we need to empower ourselves, and we're also working as a community trying to define who we are as a Cree community, and then we can go out to the world. But what has often happened to our residential school survivors and others is that as individuals, we were sent out into the world right away. So residential school would be one of them. So we miss out on family and community. And so, and for myself, we had no high school in our community, so I had to come to Transcona Collegiate as a young person to continue my education. And I could pass for non-Indigenous. I could, you know, some people would sometimes think I was Asian or another culture. And so when I went to high school, I never said who I was. I wasn't proud to say I'm Cree and, you know, and I'm from Fisher River. I just blended into the school until one day the high school teacher was talking about history, and it came to a place where they started talking about Main Street and the Indians on Main Street. And the teacher had the class all discussing, and it's a suburb that's, middle class, I would say, and some well-to-do. And so I just sat there. I never said anything, but it came to a place where the teacher said, "Well, what would you do if an Indian came to school here with you?" And the guy, my student colleague was sitting across from me, a guy, and he says, he said, "I think I'd tell them to go back to the reserve," he says, "where they belong." And so then I put my hand up and I said, "I'm from an Indian reserve." I said, I don't hang around on Main Street. I'm not lost. I'm here. And so you could have heard a pin drop. And so then the teacher says, "Okay." He says, "So tell us about what life is on the reserve." So I did. I said, "We live in houses," and I said, "They may not be as nice as these ones in Transcona, but we still live in houses, and we have our pride, we have our way of life." And so the next time I went home, I brought pictures back and showed them and shared with who we were. So even we face those kind of experiences. And so I was sent out into the world, and I missed out on family and community life until I worked in the city for over 25 years with Health Canada and with Indian Affairs. I was an Indian agent. And I often said that when I worked there. I said the Indian agents still exist, is still alive because of the way the system works and the way they make decisions. They would often make decisions without the leadership there, and the chiefs and councils would come to meetings, and they would get a big welcome, and they'd have this big boardroom and talk to them and listen and say yes. And then after the leadership would leave, then they'd have a meeting. "Okay, what are we going to do?" And then so a decision would be made instead of together. And I said, "Well, what happened to, they were talking so nicely about, we want to walk with you, and we want to, we are your colleagues, and so we'll make decisions together." So my husband one time told me, he said, "You better watch," because he said, "They're going to be walking you out of there one of these days." Because that's one of the gifts I think that was given to me, is courage. And because the Bear Clan, an elder told me that I belong to the Bear Clan, and one of the teachings of the Bear is courage. And so I would often stand up for our people, and I did that even nationally at the United Church, and stood up and spoke for our people. And so I think that's a gift that Creator and God gave me, was the gift of courage. So we have a lot of professional people and helpers, but we also have allies. If you go back to, go to the next one, next slide, then we have to go on this journey, I believe, as Indigenous people, is we have to go back and look at who were we, and how were we self-governing, self-sustaining, and what happened to those roles, and how do we live by those natural laws again. And we can never go back because we already have been impacted, influenced by the system. And so, but I always say that during that journey, we also had allies. And I often hear residential school survivors even saying that there were some nice people in there, and they looked after us and took care of us, even though there was a lot of the others that were abusers and predators and didn't take care of our people. But there were others that did. And so we have to recognize that as well. And we had allies, and in the church as well, we have allies. We have allies out there, but we need to first define who we are. And I always say to people that I'm presenting to, as our allies, what I ask you to do is to advocate on our behalf. that we are citizens and we are great people, and to teach your children about who we are, and then advocate with us, walk with us, and advocate in walks or areas that we're working towards becoming healthy, well Indigenous communities and people. The apathy and the dependency is still there, and that's a real challenge for our resource, our staff, to reach the young people. Addictions is one of the biggest problems we have, and violence. So at some point in time, then our elders and our resources, I think, have to talk. How do we go there? How do we get there back, our life back? And I always like to close with Ovid Mercredi. He was a national chief. He's a Cree leader, an elder from Grand Rapids, Manitoba. He always talked about the spirit of who we are. And I used to wonder what he was talking about. He's a lawyer also. We have to advocate the spirit of who we are. And so we have to find out on this journey of healing, reclaim. We have to claim without shame. And we have to reclaim, I guess I would say, and rebuild ourselves as First Nation people, as Cree people, and combine our old teachings with the new knowledge that we've learned along the way, and combine those. And I would say that's my journey as a presentation, and I hope that I have been able to help people understand a little bit about who we are as Cree people. Thank you.
Thank you. Elder Gloria Cook. Wonderful. So we have a microphone in the middle there of the room. If you would like to ask a question, or perhaps you have a very brief story you want to share that Gloria's presentation has reminded you of, you're welcome to do so. There's two options. You could come forward to the mic, or I could take the mic to you. That wasn't a threat.
You could ask any questions, but I don't promise to have all the answers.
There you go. So does anyone have a question or a story that might have come to mind? Yes. Okay, very good. So the handheld, Peter? We're not on yet. No, we need to keep speaking. Okay, try again. Yeah. Can I just check the switch? Yeah, it's on. Okay, try again. No, Peter, we still don't have sound. The switch is on. There it is. There it is.
Hello.
Yes. No.
No.
I thought it was. Keep talking.
Talking.
No. Peter, we don't have sound from the handheld mic. It is looking like. Okay, you could. Yeah. Okay, let's go up here. Sure, if you don't mind, I'm going to run back and we'll see if Peter can get the handheld mic, because talk about intimidation, right? To the pulpit! Preach on, sister! So there you go. And I will try to see if we can be less intimidating.
Hello.
Yeah, it's on.
Well, thank you, Gloria. That was wonderful. In our family, we have oh dear, I'm going to get emotional. We have an adopted
Okay.
Cree son. And we couldn't understand why he was sending his children to Cree immersion. And I think he was trying to get them to know themselves. And we went along with it, and we just see that family as so solid. It's a mixed race family as well. Right? The woman is Filipino, and they are a wonderful family, and I think you helped me there. That's all I wanted to say. It's just a wonderful journey.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to also affirm how important our language is. We have lost our language as well as, either through residential school or through our parents. For myself, my parents spoke Cree, and they would speak to us in Cree, but when we responded, if we responded in Cree, they'd say, speak English. But that's a lesson they learned in residential school, speak English. And so my dad also believed that if we were to survive in the world, that we would have to learn English. But our language is so deeply embedded within us. Any Indigenous, any person with a language would realize that, understand that, how deeply embedded that language is part of our culture. And I can understand when your son wanted his children to go into Cree immersion. So we're relearning our language too. I can understand for the most part and say a few words, but we're going to night classes taking Cree as well.
Great. Okay, we're see if we can get some sound out of this mic, Peter. There we go. We've got some sound. That's good. Well, that won't work. All right. This is as far as we can put it. It's now on the level, not up high. So if anyone would like to come forward here, I can't bring it to you now. We'll try to get that fixed for tomorrow. That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's going to be a very full day tomorrow. Anything? Okay. Yes, if you could. Is Archbishop Legat from St. Boniface Diocese. We're so honored you're here.
Good evening.
See if I can get this up higher.
Thank you very much. Yes. What I would ask is, and you spoke in your presentation about allies, and I'm quite sure that's what we all want to be. Allies. And we also use the expression walking together into the future. And I know that encompasses many things. Could you speak to a few examples of what for you would be walking together?
I feel very strongly about our people making our own choices about what our future will be. And so the government systems still talk a good line of walking with us, but when it comes down to the crunch, the bureaucracies are still there, and they still have their policies. Government policies is an example of that keeps us down. And so even the church's policies, sadly to say, we don't often have the power to make our own decisions about what we would like in our church, for example. The church would often, most of the policies of governments and bureaucracies are punitive, meaning that you can't do this, you can't do that, or if you do this, even in our workplaces, you'll see that on the reserve. I often advocated with our leadership that our policies are punitive when we need to go on this journey here of healing and go back to our old way of taking care of ourselves. And so the policies that are in the world now and the systems are more of what we can't do. And if we do, then you're going to be punished this way in some form. And usually if it's government, it's withholding funding. So we can't do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And so that's an example of the governments could come and listen to us and work with us and give us, but at the same time, we need to also heal and from that violence and what is and what the apathy that we have. That's a struggle for us, and so we have to also become well enough so that we make decisions that are for the people and not self-serving. Because as human beings and as egotistical human beings, we're all in the same boat where we'll often make decisions that are self-serving before community and the people. And so those are the kind of things that we face as a community with either whether it's the church or whether it's the government. And so an example would be perhaps with our United Church at home. We've often talked about that. We'd like to indigenize it so that our Cree culture is also part of that church and who we are, instead of just using the Bible to teach about who we are. And oftentimes religion will tell us that we're a lowly worm, and we're sinners first before telling us that we have spirit within us and we are good people and that we can build on that. And the spirit of who we are is what Ovid talked about. So we need to recognize that and be proud of who we are as Cree people. There's teachings, the 7 teachings that we have are also in the Bible. My husband went to training at the Dr. Jesse Soto Center, Sandy Soto Spiritual Training Center for 3 years. And he worked in the counseling field, and he often worked with anger management. But he said, I need to understand who we are as Christian people, but also who we are as Indigenous people. And so that training center helped him understand. He said, I need to bring that. I don't want to be a minister, he said, to stand in front of a pulpit and preach to our people, but I'd rather work with our people and help us discover who we are or rediscover who we are as Christian Cree people. And so he did that. He took 3 years of theological training, and he often would find teachings in the Bible that were parallel to some of the traditional teachings. And one example is the 7 teachings could be paralleled with Romans 12. There's some teachings in there about the gifts of the people. So those are examples of how we could indigenize our churches that, our elders long ago taught these were natural laws, these were God's laws, and so it's in the Bible as well. But walking with us, it's going to be a long journey, I believe, because the government also has to understand that we're on this journey and we need to heal and help ourselves so that we become healthy leaders. But we're getting there. We have hope. Like I said, there's lots of people on healing journeys as well. But our target group recently was, we said we always talk about our youth being our future leaders, but we always just say it, it's words, and we said we need to do something. We need to put that into action. And so this summer we had a youth elder summer camp, and we wanted to talk about our personal gifts and leadership gifts that we had. And we had, the first day, it was a 4-day camp. We had many elders, but we had 4 youth that showed up. But the youth were also working, so it was during the week, and then, but there was one youth that stayed throughout the whole 4 days, and he was committed. He was there every day. He didn't say much, but he just listened, and you could tell he was listening because he was scribbling on his notebook, and as the elders shared, and we did our projects, we did a shield of who we are as individuals, and he did that. And the last day we had a feast, and we got together and we shared, and we said, okay, who wants to go first? He put his hand up right away, and he wanted to share. And he never said a word all for 4 days, but he got up and went in front and shared about who he is. And so the elders were so proud of him, and at first we were disappointed. We said, too bad there was no more youth. But we said there was one youth. We connected with one youth, and so we might have to do that and connect with one youth. And so there's hope. So walking with us, I think the more you learn about our gifts and who we are, and how can we help the individuals in the city that are invisible, and make them, maybe make posters of role models. Maybe we need to put those up in the world. These are Indigenous people and contributing citizens. There's all kinds of ways. I hope that helps a little.
Good. Thank you. Any more questions or comments or? Okay, there's 2. Joyce, do you want to come first? Sorry, you need to come up to the front. So Joyce Clouston, who's coming up, wrote the book Journey to Fisher River, which is in large part Stan McKay's story.
And to say that I had the great privilege of visiting Fisher River some 30 years ago, I think, perhaps a little more. And when I was there, I should say that I grew up near Selkirk, and so my Cree-speaking grandfather didn't talk at all about the stories. And when I was walking with Elder Stan McKay, I knew the country really well, the muskrats, and I mean, I grew up in the parklands, the aspen, very similar. And when I walked with Elder Stan McKay, the entire landscape, I felt like I was seeing it in a new way. It was very rich, and it profoundly impacted my life. So there are many gifts that I so appreciate receiving. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate it. I really appreciated the way that you described it today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
We do live in a beautiful land, and I too didn't realize until my later years how beautiful our environment is around us, even though the land is rock and swamp, and but my sister and I often walk, and we discover the beautiful land and the nature all around us, and so it's opened our eyes too. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of Fisher River, our people, and I'm happy to be here tonight with my colleagues and elders, and including Stan. He's going to be here tomorrow morning, so to share as well. So thank you.
All right, we have another question. Clark, do you want to come forward? Clark's from St. Andrews United Church, St. Andrews River Heights United Church.
First of all, thank you very much for your inspirational talk. I'm sure I'm not the only one who despairs about the problems that we see in this city, and I'm sure it's not just this city. Poverty, and that's a big one. We know that. Addictions, and I have no answer. I don't even have a question. I have a lot of pain for what I know is happening. I worked in child welfare. I apprehended children. I've done family work in the city with all kinds of people. I suppose there'll always be problems with us because we are people. I think that's all I had to say, but thank you very much for your talk.
Thanks, Clark.
I agree with you. I don't have an answer either. But there are more than Indigenous people on the streets for sure, and it's become a world problem, and so I think that's something that we have to talk about more. But for myself, I still struggle with our people being on the street. I want to get angry with them and upset, but at the same time, I wonder what their story is. And I feel bad, and I feel guilty, and I want to help, but my husband was more compassionate and forgiving. If people asked him for money, he would give them. And I would say, no, let's give them some food or whatever. Let's go buy them lunch. And he says, no, they have to make their own choice. And so they're on their own journey. And he often taught me a lot of traditional teachings as well, that we have to respect people where they are too, and only help when they ask you for help. And that's a real tough one in the addiction world, to just ignore it. We can't, though. I don't believe we can ignore it anymore, because there's people from all over the world on the streets, from other countries, I suppose, and just lost people. Maybe it's something the church has to address somehow.
Yeah, thank you. Any last help? Here's Linda. Linda Trono, retired minister from West Broadway Community Ministry. Oh, here, sorry.
I could stand on the stairs.
There we go.
Kinanas komitan. That's thank you in Cree, or some semblance of thank you. What I wonder about in the walking together is whether some of it for us might be following, because like what I really appreciate is the leadership that is being given to us by many Indigenous peoples around standing up against oil companies to save the land, to save the water, to protect us from climate change. And and climate chaos and disaster. And I think part of walking together is following you and learning from you. And so that's what I want to say.
Do you want to say? No? No? Okay. Agree, she says. All right. Is there anyone else?
I think walking with people doesn't necessarily mean walking ahead or walking behind. It could be either. There are times perhaps that you might have to walk ahead of us and help us. There are times when we could walk ahead and help. And there's other times when we walk together on common ground, on common issues. So I think that's what I mean by walking together. Didn't ask, but did you go see?
Okay, great. So I think we are drawing to a close, unless I see one last hand in the next second. Second's up. All right. So just a very brief description of what's happening tomorrow. So we are beginning early with the worship service here, starting at 10 a.m. It'll be about an hour and a half long. We are going to have an Indigenous drumming group with a big drum here to welcome us in, and then to usher us out with an honor song. You've heard that Elder Reverend, oh, he has so many titles. Stan McKay will be preaching tomorrow. And we will, just finish my, I think I see a hand, but yes, go ahead. Sorry? Speak louder? Can he speak a little bit? Tonight? Can you speak? Oh, please come forward. Yes. Come to the mic here. Yeah, that mic there, if you're able. It helps us hear you, and it also allows those who are watching, like on the live stream, to hear you. Thank you.
Only heard about this today. I was just happened to look on Facebook. Well, I wasn't sure where it was happening, and then I remembered the United Church. Then I Googled United Church, and I found this place. So anyways, when I was a younger man, back in my early 20s, I traveled out to Morley, Alberta. I'd been back in the mid-70s. We had a conference out there pretty much every summer. I think I went 3 years. But there was all kinds of people there, the native elders. Some people are in the church. And some of us we're kind of thinking, why don't we all get together again, have a reunion with a conference like that somewhere? Just kind of work together, I grew up in a church too, when I was a kid. I grew up Presbyterian, and I went to a residential school in Kenora. Yeah. My two children are half Cree, and their mom is Cree, I guess. And I kind of understand some of the language when I hear it. Anyways, was honored to meet some of the people, like Ernest Atusis. And but a lot of those people are gone on, you know. And there's Chief John Snow. He was a host up in Morley, Alberta, at the conference. Well, it did a lot of good for a lot of people there, you know. People found their spirituality, their identity, you know, their strength in there. Always making my own decisions. I think about things carefully. And I follow my own native spirituality. Yeah, that's what keeps me going. And yeah, I didn't think about about the 7 teachings. I thought about it. Yeah, they're kind of like similar and alike, I guess, with the 10 Commandments, I would say. Yeah. I guess that's all I really need to say. And sorry for barging in like this. Yeah, my grandma, she was a really kind person, my grandmother. She lived to be maybe in her 90s. And I remember her having the Bible out there a lot of times. And you know, she prayed for people. I guess with her prayers, she looked after me when I get up and leave, and I travel different places in Canada. I was only like maybe 15, 16 years old, and traveling around, hitchhiking around. And that was after I left the residential school. I just wanted to get away from, I guess, what I experienced there at the residential school. And this is more like freedom for me. And what my grandmother, she used to help. She used to feed people on the highway. She'd go down the hill from her house, and then she'd go down there with a bowl of soup with a pot, and she'd go and talk to these people who were on the highway trying to get a ride, like hitchhiking. Well, that's what I was doing. I don't know. It could be anywhere else. It could be in the States, Canada, and I believe that's how my grandmother looked after me. She prayed for me. She was also helping people she didn't know. She fed them. And I guess she sometimes told them, I have a grandson that's doing what you're doing now. So, you know, that's the understanding I have about that. You have to be good to people, you know, kind to people, I guess, you know. I guess that's all I want to say. Oh, yeah, I want to say thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that you understand where I'm coming from. Chimiwaj.
Thank you. Thank you for your courage to tell your story. Things will percolate. They'll keep percolating, and stories will keep coming. We're not ending tonight, right? This is just the beginning. So tomorrow the worship's from 10 to 11:30 or so, and we'll see how long it goes. Following that, there's lunch. Feast Cafes providing box lunches for everyone, and they're providing a ton of box lunches. So please plan to at least eat here because there will be lots of food. And then around one niche we're going to divide, well, we'll see how many people there are, but we might divide into 2 groups. And Stan McKay will take a group into the gym, and Gloria will be here in the sanctuary. There'll be some more conversation. We are going to be inviting some others who are residential school survivors or multi-generational survivors to tell their stories. So we'll hear some of those stories in the afternoon, and then have a little bit of time for some small group discussions in the different places. And then about 1:15 or so, we'll try to wrap that up, and, 3:15. And we will then prepare to walk to the former site of the Assiniboia Residential School, which is just north of us, at the corner of Keniston and Academy. And there's a school you can't see it from the road. You have to drive in or walk in, as the case may be. If you drive into that little driveway there's a monument that is being constructed for the survivors of the Assiniboia Residential School. It's still under construction, but that right there is where you turn in to either walk or drive. There's lots of parking further in, so if you want to drive there, you can do that as well. So we're going to have a meditative walk. It's going to be like a prayerful, quiet walk as we go there, and then we'll conclude with Ray Coco Stevenson, a traditional singer and drummer, who will lead us in a round dance to close the afternoon. There is in the gym the Brandon Residential School display. I mentioned earlier that the number of people who have come through to see it. There'll be some time tomorrow around lunch between when we finish worship and we start around 1:30 with our groups. Some time to both eat and view the display. So we invite you to take some time to go through the display and see it, and ponder and pray as I found that I was led to do as I was watching it. So that concludes this evening. Just before we end, I want to ask all of those who have been volunteers to help with this whole week of hosting all of the groups and individuals who come through to see the display, for those who are working hard on setting up this weekend, to stand. So if you have volunteered in any way for this whole week through into this weekend, please stand. So for the conclusion of this evening, I've invited Elder Gloria Cook to lead us in a closing prayer.
Thank you, Heavenly Father and Creator, for this evening of friends and gathering. We thank you for this wonderful day again to bring to us, and to bring this evening of restful sleep and rest. Be with us as we go on our journey wherever it may take us this evening. And we ask for your blessing on each and every one of us here in this circle. This we ask in your name. Amen. Ninaskam in mantu. Hi, hi.